This episode is sponsored by the Bridge to Recovery, a nonprofit program on 115 acres near Bowling Green, Kentucky, a tranquil place where they've been changing lives for over 40 years. Their people improve their quality of life by acknowledging past emotional wounds and healing from all forms of trauma. The CEO, Paul Hamlin, has been a friend of mine for 20 years. Call him directly at 858-945-7848. That's 858-945-7848, or you can learn more about the Bridge to Recovery by clicking the link in the show notes or visiting thebridgetorecovery.com. Thank you for listening to The Path to Authenticity. My name's Tom Gentry. I think of this show as the opposite of small talk. You'll hear real conversations with real people who know who they are. We talk about what makes them who they are, how they became who they are, and how we might become truer expressions of who we are.
Or on Facebook and Twitter at MOC with Tiffany. Now, here's Tiffany Werner.
Hi, thanks for listening, and this is Moments of Clarity. I'm Tiffany Werner. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and I'm your host. And today we're going to be talking about substance abuse, recovery, mental health, and especially when recovery is required at a young age, and how to cope with that, especially socializing and everything our society has kind of embedded on us. First, I want to say hi to Ed behind the glass. Ed. Hi, Ed.
Afternoon.
Thanks for helping me today and for setting up the show. He's really helpful. And we have a great show today, and we have a guest our guest is on the phone, ready to go. So our guest is the host of a podcast called The Path to Authenticity. I always have a hard time saying that. I don't know why. But The Path to Authenticity, and he is a recovery expert, and he helps so many people, and he's worked in the substance abuse field for a long time. He also had recovery from early on, and we're going to talk about that. And I want to welcome to Moments of Clarity my friend, Tom Gentry.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Tiffany.
Tom.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for being here.
No problem. No problem.
This is a train in your background.
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
louder
Yeah.
into the phone so I can hear you.
You can't hear me?
I can hear you. It's just soft.
Okay. Is that any better?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay.
And so Tom, we were talking about having the show about substance abuse and recovery, and just for the listeners, just give us a little bit of feedback on your history and what led you into sobriety at a young age.
Okay. Well, first of all, let me just say I always feel a little uncomfortable anytime someone describes me as an expert in anything. I have a lot of experience with this. I've worked in the field of addiction treatment and recovery for a long time, and I got clean and sober at a pretty young age. But first, can I just ask you, the last time I was on The Bell, you ring the bell. Can you just tell me what that's about? What it means when you ring the bell?
It means you suck. No.
Oh, easy.
Every time somebody says Moments of Clarity or makes an actual good point or valid point, instead of interrupting, I kind of just validate it. Okay. All right. So I'll try to necessitate the bell often here. If you say I had a moment of clarity, I would ring the bell. Well, I grew up kind of in a culture where there was a lot of drinking going on, and it was sort of inevitable that I was going to end up having a drinking problem at a pretty young age, and I did, and I had the opportunity to get some world-class treatment when I was 23 years old, and partially because I actually followed the treatment recommendations and followed through, I'm still here to tell you about it. So I
literally nearly drank myself to death at 23 years old. And
Wow.
I'm the youngest of 8 kids. There's quite a bit of alcoholism in my family on both sides. I had an older sister she passed a few years ago, but at the time, she had been suffering from alcoholism and a lot of other issues for a long, long time. And she found recovery in 1995 at this facility. And then a year later saw me in the depths of my despair and alcoholism and helped me get help. So thank God I had that kind of family support. And it was also really, really useful to have a family member, as a person in early recovery, to have a family member who was also in recovery and understood kind of what that means to live that way. It was really helpful.
Yeah, it helps to see somebody as a positive role model, as well as, especially when you come from a family that probably wasn't that best of an example, that weren't setting a good example.
Yeah, and
exposed to a lot of drinking and things like that.
There was that, but also just to have a family member who kind of understood what it was like to go through all this stuff and to need to make these adjustments to survive without going back to alcoholism.
Mm-hmm.
It was just really helpful to have someone who loved me, who knew me, who had seen me at my worst and could kind of guide me through and say, hey, this is what it was like for me when I first stopped, and you're going to encounter this, and they're not going to understand that. And just kind of helped me get a solid footing in my foundation of recovery from a family standpoint, which was really important to me.
Yeah. And so I'm going to take this time to welcome callers to call in. We want you to join our discussion today. It's 866-826-1340. Once again, 866-826-1340. Call in and join us with feedback or stories or questions you have. And I know Tom says he's not an expert, but I think years of experience and years of working in the field makes someone really good at this.
Well, and
if you don't want me to say an expert.
No, it's okay. It's just, as a recovering person, one of the things that's really, really important is to maintain a certain level of humility about oneself. And that's kind of where that comes from. I really kind of can't deny the experience. I've had some really great training. I've had the opportunity to work for some fantastic facilities over the years. There's an agency that I do some work with now, called Feinberg Consulting, where I do some case management and recovery coaching. But it's just a really, really solid agency that's been around for a long time. And we're as good at that kind of work as anyone in the country. So, but one of the things you and I talked about on the phone as we kind of prepped for this, and we were talking about where we wanted to go with this conversation, is the idea of entering recovery at a young age,
because it's hard. It's hard for people in their early 20s to accept that they have a problem, and then to not only that, but to socialize and to be accepted, or to have things to do that other kids are doing, other young adults are doing. There are society, a lot of kids, a lot of people, and even people that don't like to participate with drinking or doing other things or clubs or anything like that, have a problem meeting people that do things together. And it's not all the way around. And I'm sure a lot of people listening, like, I have friends that don't do that, and we all do.
Well,
but to have that limitation on somebody that's 20 years old, that's got to be rough.
Yeah. I will say, as a guy I stopped drinking at 23. I've always kind of felt like, it's hard to get sober young. I don't really know that it's any harder to do it at a young age as it is. I think it's hard at any age because it's a drastic life change that you have to make. There's a saying, You don't have to change anything. You have to change everything. And that's kind of true. Just your whole, the lens that we look at life through has to change pretty drastically.
Right.
And, you know, I wouldn't want to be an older adult who
I
was
like how
trying.
you said that. The lens that we look at life through has to change.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you get a bell for that.
I thank you. I appreciate that. That's one I'm keeping track. Yeah, but I think at any age, you know, if I was 40 years old trying to get sober and I had a whole entire life where there was this social network that was built around drinking, that would be pretty difficult too. You know, but I think why it is relevant is because, you know, in 1996, when I found myself in treatment, you know, the place was full. I was in a men's program there was only one other guy in his 20s. He was a couple of years older than me. Everyone else was at their youngest in the late 30s. Most of them were in their mid to late 40s. There were some guys in their 50s. My roommate was 67 years old. There was an 84-year-old there. And you just don't find that anymore. You don't. That's not what you see. If you walk into pretty much any addiction treatment facility now to do a tour and you look around, I mean, you're not going to see anyone over 70 and you might not see anyone over 30. Kind of the age of onset of use has lowered over the years, first of all, but also the drugs of abuse that are prevalent now, the opiate addiction thing. I mean, the drugs are just, they lead to a descent so much more quickly. People kind of crash and burn. So, and, you know, there's a real possibility of death, you know, from overdose with these drugs that, you know, just doesn't really happen that often with alcohol, you know, and when,
especially like alcohol and opiates, the detox it can be fatal.
Yes. Well, alcohol and, you know, people don't know that, you know, we don't hear about this much, but alcohol, you know, it's really the withdrawal from alcohol. The brain doesn't know any difference between alcohol and a benzodiazepine like Xanax or Valium, and withdrawal from these.
Alcohol doesn't know the difference between Xanax or Valium. Is that what you said?
The brain doesn't. Yeah.
Okay.
So withdrawal from those types of drugs or alcohol, you know, the withdrawal can lead to death. You know, it can.
Right.
From alcohol.
So a lot of people have to go through detox and before entering residential because of alcohol or opiates. But the drug use is so prevalent nowadays for younger kids. I mean, like they're starting in middle school now. And so the likelihood of an addiction by the age of 20 is higher now than it used to be.
Yeah.
And it's really sad. We have a caller. Welcome to Moments of Clarity. Hi, Patrick.
Yes, this is. Hey, good.
Thanks
good
for calling in.
To both of you. I was just listening to, you know, getting back, I guess, out into the social climate. And, you know, I'm 43, unfortunately. But trying to get back out it's been really difficult because everything I've done, I was drinking, whether it was at the movies or at any sporting event, out to dinner. So, yeah, it's been really, I guess that's been the challenging part, is to be able to step out and not, you know, get caught up in everything. But, you know, it's been an eye-opening experience, realizing now after being sober for a while that I can actually have fun without having to drink at every event I'm at.
Right.
So I just...
Yeah, that changes like the whole modality. A lot of people have to get used and relearn how to do everything sober. What do you think, Tom?
Well, I think one of the things that was sort of relevant for me is, you know, I kind of wanted life to be like a big party, you know, and to have all this excitement with everything I did. And so, you know, I definitely had to get past that. And for me, you know, so there's not the kind of excitement now that in any way really relates to, like, for me, what it was like to go to a concert and have a few beers, which for me was never really just a few beers or smoking. It's, there's
It wasn't
just
a few.
no, but
Nowadays, like the beers are like $12.
but what's different now? What's different now is that I live in a deeper sort of way. So when I go to a concert, I'm much more engaged in that concert. I'm there. I'm attentive. It's really a deeper sort of experience. And what has really
it the next day.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the simple part of it, but it's just so much more meaningful to me now, and I appreciate it so much more. And I think the other thing for me is that, all of the relationships that I have are deeper and more meaningful than they were before. They're just not nearly as superficial. So, it's like we kind of give up some parts of life, but to me, the gain is so much greater. But, the bottom line, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say the bottom line is it's just awkward making that transition, going through a period of time where it just feels funny.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I'm a lot more grateful for the time that I get to spend with my family, especially my son. I was incarcerated, unfortunately, for about almost 5 years, and just trying to acclimate back into society has been a difficult thing. But you're right; the relationships are completely different. I appreciate everything a lot more now.
Yeah,
but that's all I got. Thanks.
Well, and that's a big transition in and of itself, having been incarcerated and going back out into the world. I mean, that's one of the things we don't realize about that part of our society is that, it's a pretty difficult task, and it's probably a good analogy of what it's like to get sober and to be out in the world without being, bound by the chains of addiction.
What do you mean? What's the analogy?
It's a real adjustment, when you're caged for 5 years and then you go back out in the world and, you're living a completely different life. And that's kind of what it's like when you're in an addiction and then you stop and you kind of open your eyes and suddenly you're feeling everything that you were numb to before. I mean, it's a big change. It really is.
Yeah, Patrick has it even worse. It's like coming out after being incarcerated. Not only is it readjusting to society after 5 years of not being in it, but then also having to readjust to society sober after not being
Double
in it
whammy.
for 5 years. Yeah, so there's probably shame and guilt and uncertainty anyway.
Oh yeah.
How's that going for you, Patrick?
It comes and goes. I try not to get sucked into the shame and the guilt because I know that pushes me back into seclusion, and then I know that's kind of my trigger. So, I know when I start to seclude myself that I need to talk to somebody. Mm-hmm. Before I would just like go into my room, and the next thing I know, I'm going out to buy a bottle of whiskey. But, I understand now that, like, if I start to not talk too much, that I need to leave, talk to my sponsor, or go talk to my therapist or a good friend of mine that, that will listen to me. So it's getting better. I used to want to, instant gratification. I wanted everything. Hey, I'm sober now, so I should be happy now. But it doesn't work like that, unfortunately. But, I've been really patient and just kind of trying to, this is really cliche, but take it one day at a time. That's been the best thing for me.
That's the only way to do it. That's why it's cliche. But yeah, well said. Thank you so much for calling in. I wish you the best of luck, Patrick. Keep taking a positive mindset. And, people make mistakes, and how we learn from them and make opportunities as learning opportunities is the best. But,
thank you. You guys have a good day.
You too. Thank you.
And it's time for our first break, Tom. So I'm going to take our break, and we'll be back with Moments of Clarity in just a moment. Stay tuned.
All right. The Path to Authenticity is powered by Equivox. For digital marketing and web design services, visit equivox.com.
Hi, welcome back. And if you're just tuning in, this is Moments of Clarity. My name is Tiffany Warner. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and I'm your host. And today we're talking about recovery, substance abuse, and mental health. And we are discussing about how it's difficult for some people to start sobriety at such a young age, but it's happening more and more nowadays. And my guest today has been in the substance abuse field. He's in recovery himself, and I would consider him an expert. And
Thank you.
And he's giving his expertise on how it feels to get into recovery and some tools that we can use, and maybe why people start so young. And welcome back to Moments of Clarity, Tom Gentry.
Thank you.
So Tom, it's fascinating to think of why people are starting earlier nowadays, why people are taking up things so early. And I don't know how it was when you grew up, but when I was in middle school, there wasn't any drugs going around in 6th and 7th grade like there is today. And it's scary. It's scary what we're sending our kids into.
Absolutely. And being the father of a 13-year-old son, it is definitely scary, especially now with the whole vape thing, the edibles, the, CBD oil, there are just so many more avenues for getting into trouble than existed when I was a kid. And I mean, I started drinking at a really, really young age. It was me. It wasn't like I fell into a crowd of people who all did. I mean, it was me. I had access to it. I took advantage of it. In terms of pot and stuff like that, middle school, it was, there were a few kids, but, it was rare. It really kind of took off by the time I got into high school, but we're still talking about things like pot. Not to imply that that's great or anything like that, but you're not going to die.
It's not like
from
Molly
smoking
and
a
all
joint.
this other stuff.
Right. You're not going to die. You're not going to have respiratory failure from smoking too much pot. I mean, it's, that's what happens when, sometimes when, drugs like OxyContin, that's how young people have died using those drugs from respiratory failure. So, I mean, they're just, it's so much more socially acceptable to use drugs that are very, very dangerous in this day and age. It's scary,
and all the vaping that's going on too.
Yeah. And, it's easier to conceal probably than it ever has been. I mean, now you get high on marijuana, it's not like you smell it like it used to be. Not necessarily, maybe sometimes, but there are so many different ways to use it now that didn't exist before. Yeah. I thank God I'm the age that I am and I didn't have to go through all that stuff. And I worry for my son, it's a scary world in some ways.
Do you see any of yourself in him that you worry that he might be picking up bad habits early on?
I don't, that's an interesting question. I see a lot of myself in him in a good way. I've met a lot of people over the years, dads who kind of projected their stuff onto their kids. Like, oh, I can see this is, and what I've really tried to concentrate on as a parent is teaching him emotional literacy, knowing what his feelings are, knowing how to acknowledge them, knowing how to talk about them, knowing who he can trust with that kind of stuff. I always want him to know that he can come to me. I mean, those are the kind of things that I self-medicated as a kid with alcohol. I used it to change the way I feel. And I realized pretty early on in sobriety that, it was about learning how to manage. In a lot of ways, it was about learning how to manage myself emotionally, so that I don't need to change the way that I feel anymore. So that's my goal for my son, is to help him learn how to kind of deal with life on all levels, mentally, emotionally, so that he doesn't find himself, because when the day comes when he has a beer or whatever it is, he doesn't experience it the same way that I did. I mean, to me, it became a tool pretty quickly to fix something that, hopefully isn't a problem that exists with him in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we all pray, right?
Yeah. Well, you know what? I mean, he's a great kid, and, 13's a tough age. He talked to me about some stuff that's going on in his life this morning, and, I made sure he knew he could talk to me. I made sure he knew that I care and that I love him and that he's a great kid. I give him all the things that I needed to hear as a kid, or the things that I tell him. And, that's a big part for me of what I do for a living, and helping people learn how to live clean and sober, healthy, in recovery, is trying to be the person who I needed when I was their age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We have to be the people that weren't there for us when we were younger. And that's the best kind of parenting advice we could give to other parents is to supply. There was this meme that was saying something about, it doesn't matter how much stuff we give our kids that we didn't have, it's giving them the tools that we never learned.
Right.
It's like some people like to pleasure their kids with gifts or stuff, and that's great, but it's not preparing them for adulthood.
Right. And my son, his mother is a licensed mental health counselor, and so he's kind of grown up in this world. He's seen it his whole life. And so I talked to him about, these people who I work with. There are a lot of things that they kind of have in common when you start digging into their histories and hearing about what they went through that got them to this place where they needed help. And, a lot of times when they get to talking about their relationships with their parents, nobody ever really spent time with them. Maybe, and that's not to say they weren't good parents. I'm not implying that, but maybe dad really worked his tail off, and he, self-made man who became wealthy, but he was working all the time when what his son really needed is his dad there standing next to him.
Right.
And so, I've used all that stuff that I've learned, definitely as a parent, because I think on some level in treating people, we're really reparenting them in a way, and in our own healing, we're kind of reparenting ourselves. Mm-hmm. At least that's what I've come to believe. But another thing I've seen a lot is, a lot of the guys who I work with in early recovery, they have a difficult relationship with the word no. Nobody ever told them that before.
Isn't that interesting?
Or they didn't do it very
Mm-hmm.
effectively. Maybe they said no, but they never stood their ground. Or maybe
the boundaries were never set.
Right. I mean, it's simple boundary stuff, but sometimes it's just a matter of teaching people that, the answer isn't always going to be yes. And sometimes that's going to be disappointing, and you have to deal with that. That's life. That's life.
And rejection hurts. And being told no, or not getting our way, or whatever, it hurts.
And what matters then is, what do we do with that? What do we do with that hurt? Are you going to self-medicate it, or are you actually going to feel it and learn something from it? Which is the harder thing to do. Especially when you're in the habit of changing the way you feel all the time.
Mm-hmm. So people don't get the job that they interviewed for, and they're disappointed they hit a bottle, or their relationship didn't go the way they wanted it to.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that people will turn to self-medicate for, because it produces anxiety. And a lot of people don't like the feeling of anxiety, and alcohol and all sorts of things alleviate anxiety. I often think, and I was talking about this on a previous show with a different guest, but that a lot of times people self-medicate because of the anxiety, and if they were to be properly diagnosed or medicated through a psychiatrist or a doctor or whatever, that they wouldn't have that urge to self-medicate anymore, because their anxiety would be in control.
And also, as you know, the sad part of it is that, a lot of us self-medicate our anxiety with drugs like alcohol and marijuana, which do the trick in the short term, but in the long term, they definitely do not. The withdrawal symptoms from both of those include anxiety. So, and if you've ever, just been around someone who quote unquote likes to smoke pot, because that's typically in that world, the way we look at addiction to marijuana is, well, I just really, really like it, but I mean, you talk to anyone who smokes pot all the time on a day when they don't have any, they're pretty anxious. They're in a pretty bad mood until they get it.
A lot of prescribed marijuana lately is prescribed to people with post-traumatic stress or anxiety. And it's being prescribed, like, from what I understand. And that's what you have to be diagnosed with, or to see a doctor that is prescribing it, at least in Florida.
Right. Well, and, I don't want to sound like someone who is against any of that. I mean, I know what works for me and what doesn't work for me. And I'm open to the idea that medical marijuana is a thing that a lot of people can benefit from. But I also want to say that research is beginning to show more and more people having psychotic breaks secondary to marijuana use, because
really,
as time goes on, because it's so much stronger now than it used to be. The stuff that you're buying, people buy commercially now, is inducing psychosis at a much higher rate than marijuana did before. Don't ask me to cite anything because I can't.
It's okay.
So that goes back to me not really being an expert.
No, it's okay. Unless we don't really need to know all that. But I mean, I think that, like, everything that's new will have a side effect 20 years from now, or less than that. It's just, we're trying to evolve into what's appropriate and what's not. And there's all sorts of things. Nothing's the way it used to be. I want to hear some comments and callers. You guys are welcome to call in 866-826-1340, 866-826-1340. Give us your thoughts and your stories, and we'll be happy to make the call and join us. But it's kind of a touchy topic, because there's a lot of people that have different opinions on just marijuana and things like that, and alcohol. But what it always says, textbook stuff, is that it's a gateway drug into other things.
Right.
I think strongly, if we don't get our mental health in check, anything can become a problem if we allow it to evolve and to take over. So It could be a simple thing at first, but if our mental health isn't stable, anything can happen. And that's why it's so important to talk about these things and to treat our mental health.
And for me, having done this kind of work for a long time, what I'm really interested in is, okay, so we're talking about helping with a problem that already exists with an individual. What are we going to do as a culture, as a society, to get to the point where so many people no longer feel the need to numb themselves? I mean,
people no longer feel the need to what?
Numb themselves.
Numb themselves.
I mean, because if you look at the way we live why are all these people so desperate emotionally that they're, we have people dying of overdoses in droves. I mean, that's what what is it that we need to change? How can we be better as a society? That's what I'm really interested in at this point.
It's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get back to that in just a second. What can we do as a society to help people from self-medicating to the point of overdosing? And it's a question we're going to get to in just a moment. We're going to take our second break. We'll be back with Moments of Clarity. Stay tuned.
We will return to Moments of Clarity with Tiffany Warner.
Hey, folks, you can find The Path to Authenticity on Patreon, patreon.com. Patrons are entitled to supplemental content like early access to episodes as well as unedited interviews. There are other benefits you can find in the various tiers. Any contribution is greatly appreciated. Visit patreon.com/The Path to Authenticity.
Now back to Moments of Clarity with Tiffany Warner, licensed mental health counselor. To engage in the conversation, call 866-826-1340. Here's Tiffany.
Hi, and welcome back. And you're listening to Moments of Clarity. My name is Tiffany Warner. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and I'm your host. And we're talking about substance abuse, medication, sobriety at an early age, recovery, and everything that complicates everybody's reaching their potential, their full potential in life. And these things are hindering people from actually being their self that they're meant to be, their potential. And I want to welcome back to Moments of Clarity, Tom Gentry. And Tom, thank you so much for sharing. And it's funny, we're getting some funny comments on Facebook. Lori says anxiety sucks, meds suck, get a dog. It relieves anxiety. That's definitely a good solution.
Well, as someone who, I adopted a dog about 1.5 years ago. And I mean, I've always loved dogs, but it had been a long time since I had one. And, that unconditional love, I mean, it has really enhanced my quality of life to have this dog. It really does make a huge difference. And which I think gets back to my point about, why is it that we need to self-medicate en masse? Why are we doing this as a culture? Why is it happening so often? And to me, on an individual level, what it boils down to is an absence of connection. For me, I didn't feel connected enough to people. I didn't feel loved as the way that I could or do now. And that's what a dog is. That's a real solid sort of connection that's loving.
Fuzzy walking hugs.
Right. Or just, and from a counseling point of view, it's, unconditional positive regard, which we all need, from somebody in our world, someone who's always going to be there for us, and dogs can serve that purpose. Definitely. But yeah, you talk about the, really being ourselves and what inhibits us from being ourselves. And that's really what has inspired my podcast. The path to authenticity. I mean, what that means to me is the path to self. And for me, where I really got off track in life, which, alcohol was part of it, a huge part of it, but really it was, had I always been able to be true to myself and follow my own path, hear my own inner voice, follow that, then, I wouldn't have gotten into all the trouble with alcohol that I did. And the answer to that quandary has always been to get back to self, get back to who I really am. Tap into my own voice. Some people are scared
to find out who they really are.
Well, it can be kind of scary, can it? On some level, it's kind of easier just to let everybody else define us. Then we don't have to risk real failure. We can just always say, well, I did what made everybody else happy, which is a cop-out.
Right. And the question I have people answer in my office, it's like, if you met you, would you like you? Mm-hmm. Why and why not? Mm-hmm. And have them be very, very, very real with themselves. Like, if you met yourself, you weren't you, but you met you, would you like you?
Mm-hmm.
And if people are like, well, no, that person drinks too much, or that person smokes, or that person spends too much money, or that person beats their kids, I don't know, whatever.
Or that person is fake,
Yeah, it's fake or phony or can't be themselves. It's just really transparent, being able to really identify what we don't like within ourselves. And it's hard to do. And sometimes we don't want to admit our own faults. We don't. Nobody likes to admit all the things that they don't like about themselves. But most of those things on that list, you can change if you wanted to. And the things that we don't like about ourselves, if it's like that person's overweight or doesn't spend enough time with their kids or things, there's a lot of things on that negative list that we can do to improve our own personal quality of life that we don't, or we resent about our own selves.
Mm-hmm.
And that can change our own negative thoughts on how we look at ourselves.
Absolutely. A lot of times it just boils down to habits. What do I do with my time? What am I investing in my little world?
And time is something we can't get back. And time is so precious. And it's something that, we pay people for their time. We pay people for services. It's one of those things that we can't replace, and it's precious. And then with substance abuse, we're saying about addiction and things that most people, I don't think I've met one person that didn't regret their time wasted with addiction, or that they didn't remember, or time spent being upset about something or anxious or but in a way that if they could redo it, they wouldn't have done it the same way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Personally, I drank because I like to drink too. I had a lot of fun with it. Let's be real. Being young and partying and being a part of that whole world, the way I kind of describe it to people now is, I did my share of it. I kind of crammed it all into my first 23 years and did enough to last me a lifetime. Which is true, but I don't, there are things I regret doing. There are things I regret not having done. There are times I wish I was more present. But overall, I don't, one of the things that you hear around the 12-step community is this line from the literature. We won't regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. I learned from my past. And, even in recovery, the mistakes that I've made in recovery, I've learned from those too. They make me who I'm a better person because of them, because of how I've adapted in response to the mistakes that I've made.
Right. Well, mistakes are learning opportunities. They can be in the past. We learn from them, not resent them or regret them. We learn from them. Learn to not make the same mistake twice. And if we make the same mistake over and over again, that's the definition of insanity, if we expect a different result.
Absolutely.
So it's really up to us on what we're going to do with the mistakes that we've learned. I don't know one person that hasn't made a mistake in their life.
Yeah, big ones, usually. I know I have.
Those are the ones that are the best to fall from, because they make us into better people.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and, I think back to the humility thing that I talked about in the very beginning of the show. It's this idea of seeing ourselves accurately in reference to what I call God, seeing myself accurately in reference to God. I'm not perfect. I'm not a deity. I'm going to make mistakes. So who am I to be excessively hard on myself when I make a mistake? That's what makes me a human being. And going back to being a parent, if I fly off the handle at my boy, and which I do from time to time,
you're not alone.
No, I know, but when I reflect and think, man, that's really not who I want to be. I don't like myself in those moments. I go back to him and say, listen, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have handled this that way. Because when we pretend like we're perfect to our kids, that's like a form of spiritual abuse. It really is. And I didn't come up with that on my own.
Abuse?
I think so. Yeah. Or neglect at best.
It's not really teaching them anything except that they're supposed to self-shame for what they did.
Right. That I'm perfect and you're supposed to be perfect too. And that's just not reality. Mm-hmm. I didn't come up with that on my own, by the way. That's from Pia Melody literature. The idea of how, well, as parents, our fathers, mothers generally represent what God means to us as children. That's our first idea of what God is. We get that from our parents. So when we are, when we're not loving, when we're unrealistic, that we distort their views of what really on a deep fundamental level. So being real and honest with our kids, I think, is really important.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard, because we don't want to let them down and all that stuff. But again, and, like I mentioned before, the pattern that I've seen with the young people I work with is that, a lot of times it goes back to different things that happened in their childhood, how they were parented. And now we hear a lot about the helicopter parent, there's that term. And here's, this is one of the things that's come up for me over the last few years. And I'm doing some writing about is the whole idea of manhood and what it means to be a man. And, when someone's getting, at that age, when, they're getting sober between 18 and 25. I mean, they're transitioning into manhood, but they would have been doing it anyway. And that in and of itself is a difficult transition to make, let alone trying to do it while you're trying to get sober. But, I can't tell you how many times I've encountered parents who, they have a son who's 22 years old and has been through treatment 2 or 3 different times, and they're frustrated with him. And they're like, well, he just needs to man up. He just needs to get a job. He just needs to finish school. He, all these, and a lot of times what happens is, they party through high school, do whatever they do, and then they go away to college and they go completely off the rails. A lot of times don't even get a credit. And by the time the first term is over, Christmas break comes around, they're not students anymore and they end up in treatment. That happens a lot. But then you dig a little deeper and you start to find out what happened. And you find these parents who have done absolutely everything for them their entire lives. They
didn't let them fall at all.
Not only that, didn't teach them how to take care of themselves. Didn't teach them how to deal with their own issues. Didn't teach them how to do anything. Just out of love, did everything for them, and then send them off to college, and then they crash and burn. And then the parent says, oh, well, he just needs to man up. Well, what did you do to teach him how to be a man? You didn't do anything. What you taught him by doing everything for him was that he wasn't a man, or that he wasn't capable of being a man. Or
to learn to rely on someone else.
Right.
Tom, we're out of time. Man, this hour went fast.
I
appreciate you being on the show. For you guys, follow the path to authenticity. And Tom, how do we find that really quick?
Well, there's a landing page, thepathtooauthenticity.com, that will link to iTunes, Apple Podcasts, all the different platforms. You can follow me on social media at The Path to Authenticity. That's the handle on Instagram.
Authenticity.
At The Path to Authenticity, yes.
Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And thank you so much for today. And
thank
you guys, if you are bumping heads with your children, take these tools and apply it and pay it forward so that there's not problems down the road. And thank you, Ed, for everything. We'll be back tomorrow, 12 to 1, and every Thursday, Friday, 12 to 1. Be kind to yourself and to others. You don't know what they're going through. Take care.
Thanks for listening to The Path to Authenticity. If you'd like to learn more about our guest, you can find links in the show notes or visit our website at thepathtooauthenticity.com. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, if you have a suggestion for a topic, or you know someone who would make a great guest, email the show at thepathtooauthenticity@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts. If you know someone else who would enjoy the show, or even just a particular episode, please share it with them. Every little bit helps. If you're not already a subscriber, please consider becoming one wherever it is you choose to listen. You can find the show on Patreon, where by becoming a patron, you can hear episodes before they're released publicly. You can gain access to supplemental content. There are other benefits in the various tiers. Visit patreon.com/thepathtooauthenticity. Join our Facebook community or follow the show on Instagram, both at The Path to Authenticity. We also have a YouTube channel. You can connect with us on Twitter or Pinterest. To hear the songs from this and every episode, you can find the Path to Authenticity playlist on Spotify. Obviously, there are a lot of ways you could be spending your time, so I appreciate you spending some of it here with me. I'm Tom Gentry. Thanks for listening. Be nice.
Great, honeybee.
The Path to Authenticity is powered by Equivox. For digital marketing and web design services, visit equivox.com.